Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Christ the royal master leads against the foe, forward into battle, see his banners go. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Oh, for a faith that will not shrink, though pressed by every foe, that will not tremble on the brink of any earthly woe, that will not murmur or complain beneath a chastening rod, but in the hour of grief or pain will lean upon its God. A faith that shines more bright and clear when tempests rage without, that when in danger knows no fear, in darkness feels no doubt. Lord, give us such a faith as this, and then whatever may come, we'll taste and hear the hallowed bliss of an eternal home. A charge to keep I have, a God to glorify, a never-dying soul to save, and fitted for the sky, to serve the present age, my calling to fulfill. Oh, may it all my powers engage to do my Master's will. Arm me with jealous care, as in thy sight to live, and O thy servant, Lord, prepare a strict account to give. Help me to watch and pray, and on thyself rely. Assured if I my trust betray, I shall forever die. Rise up, O men of God, have done with lesser things. Give heart and mind and soul and strength to serve the King of Kings. Rise up, O men of God, his kingdom tarries long. Bring in the day of brotherhood and end the night of wrong. Rise up, O men of God, the church for you doth wait. Her strength unequal to her task, rise up and make her great. Lift high the cross of Christ, tread where his feet have trod. As brothers of the Son of Man, rise. rise up, O men of God.
Good evening, and again I say good evening. It is a beautiful evening out. It is good to be with you again. Hello, my sister love. How are you doing? Well, I guess I already know. I mean, I do kind of know how you're doing because we were talking about it back over there and in the reading. But it's still good to see you. Do you have a song request, my sister? And while you ponder that question, I've got. I'll sing this one for us. "O Christ the Healer," 957, Alicia. O Christ the Healer, we have come to pray for help, to plead for friends. How can we fail to be restored when reached by love that never ends? From every ailment flesh endures, our bodies clamor to be free. Yet in our hearts we would confess that wholeness is our deepest need. In conflicts that destroy our health, we recognize the world's disease. Our common life declares our ills. Is there no cure, O Christ, for these? Grant that we all, made one in faith, in your community may find the wholeness that, enriching us, shall reach and prosper humankind. You're in pain, your whole back and leg, in your whole back, your legs are going numb with pain from your sciatica nerve. Ooh, I remember the first time I heard about the sciatica nerve. It was when my dad had somehow or other pinched his, and I tell you what, for like 3 whole days, he laid on the living room floor. He was in so much pain he really couldn't move. Somehow or other, we got him up and got him moving to get him to a chiropractor, where he got, the chiropractor worked him over for about I don't remember how long it took him, but he went there for quite often. And I almost think he went there like a solid week every day. And then it was like twice a week for like 7 weeks or something like that, to get that fixed. Oof. Hello, Kat. You're currently watching a live video of something taking place in our area involving guns. Eek. David Street blocked off. And your son-in-law is a law enforcement officer. Son is a law enforcement officer. Ay, ay, ay. Praying for that situation. Good morning, Sam. I'm going to beam myself in the eye with that one of these days. This is our this is our loose leaf tea brewer, I guess, strainer, whatever you want to call it. I think it's tea strainer, tea ball. That's what we call it. We reach in, and I'm not gonna open it, but basically you pinch these together, and it opens the clamshell here, and you scoop up a half clamshell of tea leaves, and then you brew your tea. Put it in hot water, and we have loose leaf mint tea. If you can find a supplier that deals from Frontier Herbs, that's the warehouse, or the not the warehouse, the uh, brand, the company that deals in wholesale herbs up here, or that we buy from anyway. It's good to get wholesale tea. Sam's here trying to get some encouragement to carry on the Lord's way, because hungry and thirsty for him. Well, I hope and pray that you come to the right place. I got just a time kind of set aside for a couple more songs. Then we'll jump right into what I was going to discuss for this evening, because we're in a continuing series at the moment, based upon a question that Sean asked me. Here's one that oftentimes we think of at a certain time of the year, but really we need to kind of think of any time of the year. Oh, come, all ye faithful, joyful and triumphant. Oh, come ye to Bethlehem. Come and adore him, or behold him, born the King of angels. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Christ the Lord. Sing, choirs of angels, sing in exaltation. Oh, sing, all ye citizens of heaven above. Glory to God, all glory in the highest. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Christ the Lord. Yea, Lord, we greet thee, born this happy morning. Jesus, to thee be all glory given. Word of the Father, now in flesh appearing. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Christ the Lord. Kat says hello to Sam. Sam says this ought to be interesting. Darlene is praying for Kat and for her son. CJ says howdy. Not enough connection to see the video, but to interact with real-time comments, there's enough. Darlene says, hopefully you can hear the audio. Darlene says, hold tight, brothers. We are here for you. And Kat says, I worry about him. I wish he would find another profession. People are so mean. They are indeed. And which is why I have a lot of respect. It was one of the fields that I wanted to go in, but the good Lord had other plans. Darlene says her grandson was an officer, and he gave it up for safety reasons. CJ says howdy to Sam. And I want to sing this song before we get into it. 118, Alicia. I'll take another drink of my tea so I can be able to, my voice won't warble too much. CJ would like to know how you are doing, Kat. She has a scratchy voice, CJ. Scratchy throat, actually. When upon life's billows you are tempest tossed, when you are discouraged thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. Are you ever burdened with a load of care? Does the cross seem heavy you are called to bear? Count your many blessings, every doubt will fly, and you will be singing as the days go by. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. When you look at others with their lands and gold, think that Christ hath promised you his wealth untold. Count your many blessings, many cannot buy your reward in heaven nor your home on high. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. So amid the conflict, whether great or small, do not be discouraged, God is over all. Count your many blessings, angels will attend. Help and comfort give you to your journey's end. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. No, Sister Cat, don't be sorry about that. It is something that is concerning you, and that is fine. It would remember we are supposed to mourn with those who mourn, rejoice with those who rejoice, and we are to bear one another's burdens. So therefore, if you are heavy-hearted, we need to know about it so that we can help you bear your burden. Reba, good evening. Sam says it is hard to be an officer nowadays with all the rules put in place to help the offender get corrected and help the offender get off free anyway. An innocent gets protecting. Kat says I shouldn't bring the town's drama in here. I get worried. Mamas do that too much. Well, perhaps that's why God made them mamas. Amen. YouTube might. All right. We talked last evening edification that I was with you, which has been a week now, well over a week actually. Seeing how it was the Thursday before last. We had CJ's congregation's wonderful Reach week and the great series of lessons there. If you have not watched them yet, I do hope that you will go back and watch the replay. There was a great series of lessons, and we want to thank CJ and the Dowlett, or and the not Dowlett. I almost said Debbie's favorite congregation that she promotes there, and the Mount Morris Church congregation for sharing those with us. But the Thursday before that, because that began last Sunday, ran all week. The Thursday before that, we talked about giving, and we looked at kind of what giving was, more so about giving as it related in the Old Testament. We talked about the free will sacrifice. I think we did, if memory serves me correct, touch a little bit on tithing. We're going to begin there this evening. And to do that, I want to turn to I got to hit the pause button. Turn to Numbers. Is it Numbers? No, Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 27. To understand tithing, then actually, let's back it up. Let's go to Genesis 14 and verse 20. In Genesis 14, beginning in verse 20, what we have here, or rather in Genesis 14, what we have is Sodom and Gomorrah having been captured by Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him. After Sodom's kings, Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plains, they rebelled against Chedorlaomer and his kings. So Chedorlaomer comes in, and I think there's like 5 kings with him, battles the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plain, overthrows them, takes captive the citizenry of Sodom and Gomorrah, and including Lot. And when news comes to Abraham, of this, Abram arms his household soldiers, his men, plus he calls upon 2 other families, cities, however you wanted to it's here in verse 14. Abram heard that when he heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 300 men, 318 trained servants who were born in his own house, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, and he attacked them. Now, when he comes back, on his way back, three other ones. There was the men of Ener, Eshcol, and Mamre that went with him. But as he returns, he stops and visits with the king of Salem. Now, the king of Salem is Melchizedek. Melchizedek is a priest king, meaning that he is the priest and he is the king of Salem. You might want to move to a better spot then, CJ. And being the priest king, it's not always, it's not unheard of, but it's not the norm to have your priest be also your king. But Melchizedek was that. And what's noted of him in verse 18 is this: he was the priest of God Most High. So what we have is Melchizedek, the high priest, or the priest of God Most High. And that is speaking of the God of the Bible. What's fascinating about that is we tend to get short-sighted and think that only Abram and his family were worshipers of God. That they were the only ones. They left, because the Bible focuses solely upon them during this time, when in reality there were other servants that were true to God, as is indicated by Melchizedek. As is also indicated by Job. So, it wasn't only Abram. Now, when Abram comes here and he's talking with Melchizedek, Melchizedek blesses him and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth." Verse 19. He recognizes Abram. And he recognizes that Abram is a servant of God. And of course, that God is the possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he, speaking of Abram, gave him a tithe of all. Now, this is the first time tithe is ever mentioned, recorded in the Bible. We've had sacrifices before then, as is obvious with Cain and Abel, and is obvious in the life of Noah and of Abram. But this is the first time that we've ever heard of tithe in verse 20. So what does tithe mean? If we look at the word tithe in the King James Plus, you're going to find that tithes comes from the Hebrew word ma'aser. It doesn't really mean much, does it? Ma'aser or ma'asra, which means a tenth. And so it's a designation of it's a numerical value. And Abram gave to God via the hand of Melchizedek a tenth of what he had right there on hand. This word, masara, is used a total of 32 times in the Bible. Now, this is just the Hebrew word. 16 times it's used in reference to tithes. It's only used once in Genesis. 11 times it's tithe. One time it's used in regards to tithing, as in it's a verb. And the rest of the time, the other 4 times that it's used, it is referred to as a tenth. So we understand then that a tithe was a tenth, and it was a numerical value, which Abraham gave to Melchizedek as a symbol or for some reason. And at this time, the king of Sodom says unto Abram, give me the persons and you can take all the goods. And Abram's like, no, I'm not, I've lifted up my hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, and I'm not going to even take a thread, even into a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldst say, I have made Abram rich, save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portions of the men which went with me, and Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. So Abram didn't take anything except what his men ate. He had a right as the conqueror, but he refused to let even an evil nation say that that they had made him rich. But he was willing to give of his own a tenth to God. Leviticus chapter 27 is where we next read the word tithe, and the principle is given. We don't see Isaac given a tenth. We don't see Jacob given a tenth. We don't see any of the descendants of any of the sons of Jacob giving a tenth at all. But here in Leviticus chapter 27, we see that God instituted a tenth or a tithe upon all. We're going to drop down to verse 29. We're going to pick up in verse 29. No person under the ban who may become doomed to destruction among men shall be redeemed, but shall surely be put to death. Really? Okay. Let's go back over the KJV plus, please. Not the plus, but just the KJV. Ban. None devoted, which shall be devoted of men, shall be redeemed, but shall surely be put to death. Now, that doesn't say much about tithing. However, look at what it says in verse 30. On all the tithe of the land, this is the KJV. When did it go switch to blue? Somehow or other, I don't think you're in the KJV, my dear. Thank you. That was interesting. There, and all the tithe of the land, whether of the seed of the land or of the fruit of the tree, or is the Lord's. It is holy unto the Lord. So, greetings to you as well, Sean. Peace. We also have Kat, Darlene, and Reba. So, what we have here then is the institution of a tenth or a tithe of everything is the Lord's. So, of all the land, there's a tithe on the land, tithe on the seed of the land, a tithe of the fruit of the land, or the fruit of the tree. It's the Lord. It's holy to the Lord. Now, the tithe of the land, that was given to the Levites for their possession, for their place to abide. The tithe of the seeds, the tithe of the fruit trees, that was given every year for the harvest unto the Lord. I think he already said Sam. I would just, he already said Sam. So I was filling in the blanks of those he missed. So, and as we continue reading through here, and all the tithe of the land, or none of the, let's see here, yeah. And if a man will at all redeem aught of his tithes, he shall add thereto the fifth part thereof. In other words, if you're going to redeem any of the seed or fruit of the, et cetera, you're going to have to add another fifth of that. So you're going to pay 10, and you're going to pay 15%. Good evening, Craig. And that, so if you want to redeem any of your tithes, you have to add another extra 5% on top of that. Good evening, Heather. We're looking at giving. This was a request by Sean a couple weeks ago. And we began the first one Thursday before the Reach Week. And I told you we were going to pick it up again this week. We looked on that Thursday at the idea of what was giving, and we looked at the free will offerings. And so now we are looking at the institution of the tithe and what that was for. It was God's. God demanded a portion in recognition of his bounty, of what he did, what he gave them. Sam, it is, or Sean, rather, I should say, it is under August 3rd's video. Matter of fact, if you wait one moment, there you go. Anybody else want me to send it to him while I'm here? CJ is doing well. He doesn't have a strong enough signal to hear the video, but he's enjoying being here with y'all in the comments. Ezra, take over for you. All right. Good night, sweetie.
Good night, Reba. Good night.
Darlene, Heather, Sam, CJ, Craig. Ezra, cuteness overload. Is he going to do it? I don't think he's going to do it. There you are. Night, night. Sleep tight. Sweet dreams. Love you. I love you. What? Let's try that again. Don't forget your C. Peaceful rest. God bless. Good night, sweetie. All right. Reba says, night, night, sweet girls. God bless. Darlene says, good night, angels. Heather says, good night, Shua. Aren't they adorable? So, where were we at? Oh, yes. CJ says, good night, girls. Good. Now, as we finish reading this passage, that's the last one? Okay. And hopefully Ezra will bring up the Bible again for us. Welcome back, Sean. We are in Leviticus 27, right about verse 32, Ezra. Thank you. And concerning the tithe of the herd or of the flock, even of whatsoever passeth under the rod, the 10th shall be holy unto the Lord. So, and he shall not search whether it be good or bad, neither shall he change it. And if he change it at all, then both it and the change thereof shall be holy. It shall not be redeemed. So there were certain things of the tithe that could not be redeemed, certain things that could be redeemed. And, but regardless, this was different than the free will offering. This was required, a required giving. It was a required portion, and God did that for two reasons. First off, as you notice there in verse 30, it is holy unto the Lord. It is the Lord's in verse 30. So, Ezra, go back to verse 30. It is in verse 30. We are in verse 30. Look, thank you. So, the tithe is the Lord's. So there must be a giving back to the Lord what is his. And then there was a second reason which we find out later, and that is that it was given for the upkeep of the Levites. And we find that in Numbers chapter 18 and beginning in verse 24. Let's look at verse 23. But the Levites, he says, shall do the service of the tabernacle of the congregation, and they shall bear their iniquity. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that among the children of Israel they have no inheritance. None. But, verse 24 now. The tithes of the children of Israel, which they offer as an heave offering unto the Lord, I have given to the Levites to inherit. Therefore I have said unto them, among the children of Israel, they shall have no inheritance. So God gave the tithes so that the Levites might be able to live. All right, CJ, you have a wonderful evening, my brother. We're going to miss you. So it is safe to say then that the Lord's portion belonged to the Israelites, or to the Levites. And even of those tithes, Darlene's going to head off as well. She's not been sleeping. Aw. Well, my sister, you have a wonderful evening. May you get peaceful rest. And remember, you are in our prayers. Our hearts are with you. Our prayers are with you and for you. Take care and sleep well, my sister. Numbers 18:26, Ezra. So just scroll down to verse 26. Thus speak unto the Levites, and say unto them, when you take the children of Israel the tithes, take of the children of Israel the tithes which I have given you from them for your inheritance. Then ye shall offer up an heave offering of it for the Lord, even a tenth part of the tithe. And 27, let's keep reading through 20 further. And this your heave offering shall be reckoned unto you as though it were the corn of the threshing floor, and as the fullness of the winepress. Thus ye also shall offer an heave offering unto the Lord of all your tithes which ye receive of the children of Israel, and ye shall give thereof the Lord's heave offering to Aaron the priest. Out of all your gifts you shall offer every heave offering of the Lord, of all the best thereof, even the hallowed parts thereof, out of it. So what we're looking then is that the tithes belong to the Lord, and he has given those tithes to the Levites, but even then the Levites still had to take a tenth of that and offer it to the Lord. And it was as if it was their tithe. I'm not sure I got that one, Sean, but we're glad you're a guy. His comments are working fine, but the video, the video is not so hot. So what's the difference between the tithe and the free will offering? Well, the free will offering obviously was done out of gratitude, out of your own free will. The tithe was done because God commanded it, and so that his priests, the Levites, might actually have a means of sustenance. And this was a standing statute for the rest of the Levitical priesthood. Now, as we translate then over from the Old Testament into the New Testament, we find that the tithes were not being kept. Oh, I see. Gotcha. Thanks for the clarification, Sean. The tithes, while they were being kept, had become an onerous duty. It wasn't being done the way God had wanted it to be done. And we find that out in Matthew 23, verse 23, when Jesus pronounces a woe upon the scribes and the Pharisees. Matthew 23, verse 23. Ezra, put aside any outside distraction, and let's focus on the lesson. Matthew 23, verse 23. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay the tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought ye have done, and not left the others undone. So they did the tithes, but they weren't doing the rest. They were so nitpicky, they went down to even tithing the mint, the cumin, and the anise. But they weren't doing the rest. Judgment, mercy, faith. So Jesus draws the correlation. And in fact, I think if you remember, we talked about the free will offering. Well, let me back up just a minute. So in Jesus's day, we still had the tithing going on. In Jesus's day, we still also had the free will offering. As you might remember, I believe we looked at the idea or the we looked at Jesus's use of the widow in Mark chapter 12, verse 42, for that particular example. Mark 12, verse 42, beginning in actually verse 41, what we have is Jesus sitting over against the treasury. And we talked a bit last week or the last time about how during Hezekiah's day and Josiah's day, or actually it was Josiah's day, Joash's day, whichever one it was, they had set up a chest and the people could bring in their free will, an offer of their own free will, and put money into this chest. And when it was full, the priest would take it in and dump it in the storehouse and bring the chest back out. Well, Jesus sat over against the treasury, beheld how people cast money into the treasury. And many that were rich cast in much. But there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make up a farthing. And he called unto him his disciples, and saith unto them, Verily I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast in more than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. So what we can understand then is people were still giving, still tithing, and still offering offerings to be seen and to, offering to the Lord. And these people were not prone, or were not, we're not shying away from pretentiousness or giving, as much as they wanted or as they could for the purpose for window dressing. Were they forced to give? No. But they were, these people were, again, like I said, were giving, and they were giving much. It's kind of like, well, see, you gave five, 5 talents of silver. I'm going to give 10. Trying to outdo themselves almost is what it kind of makes it seem when you read that. And yet this poor widow, she comes in and you see her tottering in, and she just simply drops her 2 pennies in. And that was all she had. She had nothing else to give. What's the principle? We can give in 2 ways. We can give in a manner that is pretentious. We give to be seen of men. We give because it's commanded. Or we can give out of free will. In other words, I guess the ways that we can give. We can give because it is commanded. We can give because because we want to. We can give a certain amount, or we can give whatever we feel like. We can give like I said, to be pretentious or to be seen of men, or we can give privately of all that we have. Sam says, but it was the manner of giving that drawing out the woman gave from her heart. Yes, that's exactly the case. God does want us to give, and we cannot deny that principle. It was a principle that Abraham kind of demonstrated when he gave a 10th to Melchizedek. This was a man who was thankful for a successful intervention on behalf of Lot and them, a successful battle where he recovered everybody. Nobody was lost. And he offered a 10th of what he received or what he had as a result. And it kind of set the precedent. In fact, the Hebrew writer goes on to talk about that in Hebrews, about how Abraham had given if we turn over to Hebrews chapter 7, if we look in Hebrews chapter 7, in the shadow aspect or column, what you see is that they which are of the sons of Levi, verse 5, we go down to verse 5. See if I want to back up any of that. 4. Let's start in 4. Now consider how great this man was, unto whom even the patriarch Abraham gave the 10th of the spoils. And verily they that were of the sons of Levi, who received the office of the priesthood, have a commandment to take tithes of the people according to the law, that is, of their brethren, though they come out of the loins of Abraham. But he whose descent is not counted from them received tithes of Abraham, and blessed him that had the promises. Melchizedek received from Abraham tithes, and Levi, because he was a descendant of Abraham, paid tithes to Melchizedek. Now, I'm scrolling on down to 8. And here, men that die receive tithes, but there he receiveth them of whom it is witness that he liveth. Speaking of Jesus. And as I may so say, Levi also, who receiveth tithes, paid tithes in Abraham, for he was yet in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. So Abraham paid tithes, Levi paid tithes to Melchizedek. And the Hebrew writer goes on to compare Jesus to Melchizedek, verses 11 and following. Like I said, Abraham set the principle for 10% of the spoils. And God commanded a 10% for that was his portion, and he gave that 10% to the Levites for their lot, for their sustenance. You might say their paycheck, and they then were to give a tenth of what God blessed them to God. So what do we do? How are we to give? What are we to give? We briefly touched on some of that last week. Are we to give? Well, 1 Corinthians 16, chapter 1 and 2, or chapter 16, verses 1 and 2. 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. Now, concerning the collection for the saints, first of all, Paul gives order, and it's for a collection that is for the saints. As I have given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. Now we're talking to the churches at Corinth, the church at Corinth. And yes, hello, O'Shea. Paul says he had given order to the churches of Galatia. If CJ was here, we would note that Galatia was over in Asia Minor. On the Grecian Peninsula, we have Achaia, and we have, or the Macedonian, and then we have the Achaia side, or the Corinth side. And there was a competition between those two, by the way. But then we have the Galatians over in, or the churches of Galatia of the area over in Asia Minor. And Paul says he has given this order to the churches of Galatia. And he has passed the same order to the churches to the church at Corinth, that there be a collection for the saints. Some of the other, look here. If we look at Young's literal YLT, this is it says, and concerning the collection that is for the saints, as I directed to the assemblies of Galatia, so also do ye. So we understand that this collection was indeed for the saints. It was destined for the saints. However, it was a collection, and it was an order that was taken to, rather given to the churches of Galatia, the church at Corinth. And in another letter, we'll see that it was also given to the churches of the Macedonia region. But on the first day of the week, he says in verse 2, let each one of you lay by him in store as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. And then when I come, verse 3, whomsoever ye shall approve by your letters, them will I send to bring your liberality unto Jerusalem. And if it be meet that I go also, they shall go with me. So, love you as well, Sean. So what we see is, yes, this is a collection. Now, a lot of people are going to say, and that it is to be taken. Let's continue this first before I get into other things. It is to be taken upon the first day of the week. Why the first day of the week? Most easily known is because of what is done on the first day of the week. For example, 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Verse 17. Well, actually, verse 18. For first of all, when you come together in the church, in the assembly, I hear that there be divisions among you, and I partly believe it. So what happens on the first day of the week? They come together. When you come together, therefore, in verse 20, into one place, this is not to eat the supper. And they were supposed to be coming together to eat the Lord's Supper, but they had perverted that, verse 20. This is why he was not praising them in verse 17. Paul, what do you mean? Acts chapter 17. No, it's Acts chapter 20. My apologies. Verse 7. Acts 20, verse 7. And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread. So we just saw how the Corinthians were coming together into one place. And we see then that if we were to look back a verse, we'll find out that this was at Troas. But they came together on the first day of the week for the purpose of breaking bread, which is what Paul just said in Acts chapter 11 was the purpose that they were, or 1 Corinthians chapter 11 rather, and verse 20, that they were supposed to be coming together to break bread on the first day of the week. And we know from Acts chapter 2, bear with me as I run through this, Acts chapter 2 and verse 42, and they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, that's teaching, and fellowship, that's coming togetherness, and in breaking of bread, that's the Lord's table, and in prayers. These are four of the parts that we have that are liturgical. Well, that's a fancy name for the service, the worship service that we have on Sundays or on the first day of the week. They continued steadfastly in this teaching, in this fellowship, in this breaking of bread and in prayers, not to be confused where they had their, daily meals in verse 46. Of the same chapter. Because that's not done, that isn't included in, that isn't listed in the breaking of bread there from house to house is shown in that whole verse as eating a meal or eating meals. Whereas the breaking of bread back in 42, because it is listed with teaching, fellowship, and prayers, denotes that it was a service, a worship. So what we can see then is that this was done on the first day of the week. Logically, we can run through the progression there. And so that was what they were doing on the first day of the week. And Paul says, because you're coming together on the first day of the week, lay by you in store. Back to 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2. Now, the next phrase in here is, as God hath prospered him. You and I both know that God prospers each and every one of us. We, each and every one of us, have enjoyed our home, our food, our internet, our clothing, our families. There are multiple ways every day that God prospers us. This specifically is not talking about food, um, clothing, etc., but more in the case, if we were to look at the word prospered, um, I think I chose the wrong word. Prospered means it's Yodia, Yodio, Yodoyo. No, Yodo, oh, Yodo, Yodio. That's probably more closer to it. Means to help on the road, that is, succeed in reaching, to prosper, or have a prosperous journey. So, in other words, as God has helped you along your road, as you see here in Strong's, then you are to give or lay by in store. We go over to Thayer's, to grant a prosperous and expeditious journey, to lead by a direct and easy way, to grant a successful issue, to cause to prosper or be successful. As you have been successful this week, Paul says, or that week, lay by in store. As you have been furthered along your journey. And that's so that there be no gatherings when Paul was to come. And then he would send that by their generosity. Okay, so let's go back over to the passage now, Ezra. People will say, well, but this was for the special. This was a special thing. And it was specifically for um, the relief of the saints in Judea. And we can see this as we look through Acts, that indeed, yes, it was. However, does Paul limit his order to a single event? Does the gatherings cease when he comes? Well, there's a couple other principles. And in whether or not we are to give. Let's look at Romans 12:13. One of the things that a Christian is supposed to do is to distribute to the necessity of the saints and to be given to hospitality. The question then comes is, did the necessity of the saints cease once Paul passed through the church at Corinth? And I paused for an answer. Did the necessity of the saints cease once Paul moved through? Once Paul took this collection, or the men that went with him took the collection? O'Shea says no. Reba says no. O'Shea says hardships continue on and needs continued continued need to be met. Okay. Is it a duty of the members of the church to see to the needs of the church? Or rather, should I say, is it a duty of the church to oversee the needs, to see to the needs of those who are in need? O'Shea says the Grecian widows who weren't being fed had needs, and the apostles addressed and took care of it. You bring up a good point, O'Shea. Let's take a look and wander over there to Acts chapter 7, or 6, rather, O'Shea, Ezra, would you please? And in those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. Stop a minute. That ministration, that daily ministering, if we look at the word, that would be the daily waiting of tables. Okay? And so there was a daily feeding that was going on by the church. Remember, we read in Acts chapter 2 and verse 46 how that they continued steadfastly, or that they let's go back to Acts chapter 2, verse 46. I don't want to bungle this. Remember how we read in Acts chapter 2, verse 46 in it's the very bottom of the chapter, Ezra. It's only 46 and 47. So if you want to, there you go. They continuing daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily such as should be saved. They were eating together daily. There was a daily ministration by the time we get to Acts chapter 6, verse 1. And there was this murmuring because the Grecian widows were not being taken care of. They weren't being fed. Sam says there's a yes and a no, because it's also a duty of those to take care of themselves by work of the hand and to labor and stop stealing, but we can help until they get to their work. I think that you're confusing two things, Sam. There's a difference between stealing and being and necessity. Would you not agree? There are people who have needs that need to be met. That doesn't mean they're thieves. That means they have needs that need to be met. And so, like I said, do the necessities cease? Did they cease after Paul went through? Does the church have a duty to see to the needs of its members, or of the needy? And you said yes and no, but remember, I said of the needy. That's a big thing. But O'Shea pointed out here Acts chapter 6 with the Grecian widows. So by this time there was a daily feeding, and the Grecian widows were not being met. And so, of course, as Reba, I think it was, pointed out, the deacons are to see to the needs and to see that we see to those needs. I see. But that's why they appointed deacons, was to take care of the Grecian widows. And that's where we have the first deacons being installed. But notice also that as we progress through these chapters in Acts, the examples that we have it is pretty amazing, because in Acts chapter 4, if you look, beginning in verse 32, and the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and of one soul, neither said any of them that aught of the things which he possessed was of his own, but they had all things common. And with great power gave the apostles witness of the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was on them all. Neither was there any among them that lacked, for as many as were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the prices of the things that were sold, and laid them down at the apostles' feet. And distribution was made unto every man according as he had need. So what does that tell us about what the purpose of one of the functions of the church is? And of course, as we read through verse 36 through 37, we can see the example of Barnabas, which, by the way it's worded, we see Barnabas was the instigator of this selling of land, because that singles him out. So he was the one that began this practice of selling land and bringing money to the apostles' feet. But what was the function, or one of the functions of the church, specifically of the leaders of the church at that time? Was it not? I'm still waiting for a reply, so maybe my my timing's a little off. I tell you, doing the live stream is a little bit different than actually having a Bible class in person, because then you have people that, you know, they respond much more faster. But when you're doing live stream, it's got to go over the airwaves, and those times. Then you have people like O'Shea who fall asleep. No, joking. What can we? I mean, what from this passage that we've been reading, O'Shea? What was it we can determine was one of the functions of the church at that time, or rather the leaders of the church? You see it right here in verse 35. Good night, Craig. You have a wonderful evening. O'Shea says to oversee and to take care of the flock. One of the jobs of the shepherd is to feed the flock. Yeah, you get that from Acts 20. That wasn't quite the literally physical feeding that Paul was referring to. He was referring to the spiritual feeding. Sam said it was to give saints in the saints in need. And sometimes we, like you answered, well, like you didn't answer because we are slow at listening. Well, you see, I typically teach by asking questions so that you guys think about it and you guys answer it. That's the best way to judge whether or not you're getting the principle, or the what I'm trying to teach. What we see here is, to a degree, what O'Shea was saying. You notice the last phrase, last half of verse 35, and distribution was made unto every man according as he had need. So all this money was laid at the apostles' feet, and distribution was then made unto every man as he had need. Remember, we're still in the infancy of the church, and there is a huge congregation. In Jerusalem. And of course, in 5, we go into Ananias and Sapphira, and then, of course, the arresting and all that, followed by the church. So I bring you all over here to show you that the need did not cease. And the example of the church was one that looked out for the care of the needy. Is that not following Jesus's words of being a servant to each other that we see in John chapter, 13? Yes. In John 13, where he, washed their feet. Is that not part of that principle being met? Conversely, or in addition, if we look at Matthew 25, when Jesus speaks of the final judgment, what were the sheep doing? (31) through the end of the chapter. The sheep were what? I was hungry and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. Naked, you clothed me. Sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. This is verse 36. And the righteous, verse 37 says, when did we see you hungered and fed thee, thirsty and gave you drink? When saw we thee a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee? When saw we thee sick or in prison and came unto thee? In verse 40, the king shall answer and say unto them, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto the one of the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me. So, okay. It is the responsibility of the individual to care for the needy. It is the responsibility of the church to care for the church. But there is a greater principle also being in play, and that is found in Galatians chapter 6. All right, Sam, we'll try to make sure we'll put that on the board, make sure that everybody else will be able to pray for you as well. O'Shea says there is another idea, and that is that we are all a family, and family needs to take care of each other in order to remain strong and together, and that's true. Galatians chapter 6, we begin in Galatians 6 by saying, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law. Excuse me, that's not 6:1, that's 6:2. Having talked about being overtaken in a fault, we are to restore such a one. But then he says in verse 2, we are to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. We're supposed to be helping share the load, all right, of each other. But let's continue on down. We're going to go all the way down to verse 10. Verse 9. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. He had just talked about sowing. He that sows to the flesh shall reap of the flesh corruption, and he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap of life everlasting. So we're not to be weary in well-doing, verse 9, but shall reap if we faint not. Now, as we therefore have opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. If we have opportunity to do good, we are to do it. Is that not a command to continue doing good? Well, yes, it is. And it's a principle that is to guide us as an individual. It is also the principle to guide us as a congregation. If we have opportunity, we are to do good unto all men. Now, we are to always be on the lookout for ways that we can help each other, especially those that are of the household of faith. Does that mean of our own local congregation? Yes. Is that limited to our own congregation? No. Remember that the Corinthian church, the Macedonian church, and the other churches of Achaia And the churches of Galatia, what did they do? They sent to help out the churches in Judea and Jerusalem. The churches in Antioch and Samaria, what did they do? They sent to help out the churches in Judea during the famine, as we read about in Acts. So the principle is that we are to give. Now I say all this part here, the duty of the individual as well as of the church. I say that for this reason, because people will try to say that 1 Corinthians 16 is limited only to the first century church, to that limit is a limited collection and is no longer applicable. First off, it is a collection for the saints. It is a collection ordered to the saints by Paul. And it is commanded to be done on the first day of the week. So we have time, we have purpose, and we have the what for. Now, when we meet again on Wednesday, because I've gone over long, I plan on continuing this, and we're going to look at how we should give. We've talked about free will offering, we've talked about tithing, and now we've also talked about when we should give and why we should give. So on Wednesday, we're going to continue, and we'll probably be the last one, unless any of you have, and I'll open it for questions on that day. But we're going to cover what ways, how are we to give, and any other questions that you might have concerning giving. Are there any questions at the moment over what we have covered tonight? Wake up, Reba. just checking to make sure you are awake, my sister. You know, president of the Sleeping Sister sorority. Well, thank you, Reba. All right. Well, I hope that I've been able to edify you and give you a deeper understanding of giving, what it means. Oh, that's right. You're vice president. My apologies. What it means. It's kind of its purpose. So remember, Sam, you've got you got a long list, because I remember you had a blackout. So there was, 3-4 days that you missed last week because of your blackouts. So hopefully, Lord willing, you'll be able to grab some of them Reach videos and catch up and have some more strengthening time, because they were some great videos. It started Sunday morning, and we replayed each we replayed we replayed the videos, the lessons each evening, edification. So the first one happened Sunday night was Bible study. I don't know as he broke that one up, but it was Bible study and worship lessons. And then Monday night was lesson 2, well, 3 actually. However it came out. But anyway, we did it one, each evening. Edification was one of the lessons all the way through Friday evening. So it came out really well. But like I said, I hope and pray that you have been edified through our time together. I know that I have been greatly encouraged by your presence and attention. Yes, I know, Sam. It is the camaraderie, the fellowship that we have together. That's what helps strengthen. And that as you go forth, perhaps you have been renewed, strengthened, encouraged to greater and faithful walk with God because of our time together. That way, whether we wake tomorrow to serve him here on this earth, or we wake tomorrow to serve him up there, you know where we'll be, because I'll